Glory, glory, Man United. After their Carabao Cup triumph, we talk, are the Man United back and are the glory days of old coming back to Manchester? Also, we talk, what does this mean for Newcastle? It was a big, big final for them, and ultimately they came up short. What does this mean? We're going to get into it. Roll that intro. So, first things first, welcome back to the Lost in Possession podcast. If you're not already, please do hit that subscribe button. It is absolutely free. So, if you've been living under a rock, last night, the Carabao Cup final took place, Manchester United versus Newcastle, and it was ultimately a win for Man United and what looked like a comfortable win. Now, today, the topic on the agenda is whether or not this is a Man United side that look like that Ferguson era United, dominant, in form, and look hard to beat. Are they back? Or is this just a crazy lucky run of fixtures? And we'll also be talking, what does this mean for Newcastle? This is a big blow to them, big blow to their fans. And it was supposed to be the beginning of a dynasty, but they've come up short. What does this mean? Let's get into it. Reese, we'll kick things off with you. We'll start with Man United. Huge win. First trophy in 6 years. And this is a huge statement, it feels like, for Ten Hag. What are your thoughts on what this means for United?
Yeah, I mean it's big for United, isn't it? Because this is the first trophy of Ten Hag's era. I know they won under a couple under Mourinho and one under Van Howe, but there certainly seems to be different scenarios there. Seems to be a little bit more divide or uncertainties around the board, which I think is still there. But there seems to be a much more positive atmosphere around United now. I'm sure you guys have noticed that. It's definitely a lot more positive, a lot more, a lot more forward thinking, really. I mean, their performance was outstanding, let's be honest. Casemiro was world class. So if you look at our performance they put in so convincingly, they went in there, they got the job done, and even, I know we joked about it, but Ten Hag is even saying he's already looking to the next trophy. That's the mentality that they want. They're not there to rest on one. They want to make more. So this is massive for them, particularly going forward, because yes, it's going to put pressure on them, but, it gives them that, they've got over that hurdle. And I think this is where we're going to see perhaps some more United of old, so to speak. There's still a way to go, but we've got to be impressed of how they've gone on to win this trophy.
Jamie, what about you? Are you going to become the noisy neighbours once again?
Look, United are a bigger club, so technically we would be the noisy neighbours. I don't mind that. To be honest. However, this doesn't mean United are back. Winning the trophy and the way they've done it, like, fair play. You can't argue with it. It wasn't like the game was just a professional performance. I don't think United actually that well, but they just nullified Newcastle enough to comfortably win and let the sort of emotions of the competition and being in a final kind of affect Newcastle. And they played into that, nullified them, and got the goal in the win. In terms of, are they fully back? You can't say it after one trophy, but it's much better. It's looking much better than what it was previously under Ollie. Sort of everyone, we were singing Ollie at the wheel. Liverpool were singing it. Several fans were, because we thought if he's there, things aren't going to change. And now they've brought in a different manager who can actually change it. And you start to see, this £1 billion they've spent probably since they got the last trophy. It's now got them a Carabao Cup, so at least they can put one trophy by it. And when you're dividing it, money spent to trophies, it's not a invalid number anymore. But talking really about United, like, jokes aside, it's a professional performance, like I said. And I think one of the big factors was Casemiro, and not just his performance and the goal, it's what his mentality is. And I just had a quick look at the lineup again. There was no actual previous winners from that Newcastle team. Whereas if you look at United, they've got a few, Casemiro being one, you've got Well, Martinez technically won the World Cup, although he was technically third choice centre back. Then you've got Varane there as well. There's just them players who have got stuff over the line, and they're building on that. And Ten Hag saying he wants to look for his next trophy is the right mentality to have, and that's the way you should be looking at it. But with Ten Hag again winning the League Cup, it's the first trophy that Jose Mourinho won under Chelsea, I believe, and the first trophy that Pep won under City. Yet it doesn't matter if people will call it the Mickey Mouse Trophy. It's still a trophy to be won. It's a major trophy, and it gets the ball rolling, and it could be the sort of knock-on effect to go and win on more trophies.
Yeah, so in terms of this United win, I think it's absolutely huge for them. You know, a trophy, a club of this size going trophyless for 6 years, considering the money spent, considering the history, it's just not good enough. And any United fan will tell you it is embarrassing. So although, yes, it is the Carabao Cup, yes, it is the fourth, the least important trophy available. This is a big step forward for United in general, and it kind of gets that slump, ticked off, done. And for them, they'll feel like, the form they're in at the minute, they'll feel like they can beat anyone. On this run, they have beat Man City, they have beat Barcelona. They just keep winning games. Their striker is in form. They're ticking all the boxes at the minute, and all the players just seem to have responded so well to Ten Hag. And we've got to remember this: Ten Hag lost 4-0 to Brentford. Let's not forget that. We obviously had a debate last week about managerial scenarios, and it was about Potter and whether you should just have faith. United lost 4-0 to Brentford under Ten Hag, and a few months later, they're in a title race. They've won a cup. Like, football can change just like that so quickly. But for me, this feels like a huge, huge statement, even though the trophy itself isn't the biggest one. I think it'll do wonders for their confidence, and maybe, well, they're still on for the quadruple. That's all I'm going to say. United fans might like
in front of it, can you? Can't say the quadruple when you've got the Europa League involved.
Well, true, actually, true. A quadruple, I should say. But yeah, they'll be feeling confident. That's the bottom line. They'll be feeling confident.
I think one thing you have to also factor in, though, is the run that United had to win this, because I'm going to say it because City have been slanted for it from when we were winning the trophy. They've had Villa, Burnley, Charlton, Forest, then Newcastle in the final. By the way, all the 3 games that were won away, it was either at home or away, were at home. It's not a bad run at all, is it? Like, that's something you'd be very happy for and be confident for when you've had the other teams drawn each other and knocked out very early and surprisingly. So that can be taken with a pinch of salt because, everyone likes to slag off other teams for doing it. It's funny, you see on Twitter all United fans jumping for joy about it when they were slagging off when Liverpool won it last year, when City had won it 4 times in a row. It's just funny and fickle how fans can be. But yeah, like, it's a good progression for them. Unfortunately, I don't want them to have any success. I didn't actually want Newcastle to win the game, but because they were playing Man United, I had to. That was mainly down to, I know Newcastle are going to start to be a bit more successful, and I want that to be prolonged for as long as possible. So that's really the only reason why I didn't want them to win. But I think probably moving on to Newcastle on their big day out and nothing to show for it. Are there any positives from the game that we can take from Newcastle's side? Because really, they had 15 shots and only 2 were on target. That's disappointing when it's your biggest game for absolute years. Jordan, what did you kind of make of the Newcastle performance and progression of where they're going?
I think the occasion did get to them. And as you touched on earlier, this is a team that currently are lacking winners. There's not loads and loads of experience in this squad of littered with trophies. It's just different, and the same is at player level and manager level. Eddie Howe, he's not that manager who's been there and won trophy after trophy. So I think you've got to put things into perspective. As you said, you've got Casemiro in there. You've got all these players who have been there and done it, or been to big finals. Newcastle, they had the whole. We saw the support from them. We saw the history, the stories, everything leading up to it. So there was a lot of pressure on their shoulders, but the scoreline. I think the scoreline was a little bit unfair in the sense that I'm not convinced it was a 2-0 game. Like I do think Newcastle gave a good account of themselves. It would have meant a lot more, obviously, to score and be like, oh, we were close. But I don't think they can sit there and say, oh, we didn't try. It will feel like an opportunity missed, but I don't think they can beat themselves up too much on the actual performance. And I think the reality is like they will get there. There's going to have to be a mentality switch. We've seen it with all the big clubs. And when you're at your first final, you haven't won, I think, domestic trophy in 67 years. You're going to feel a bit of weight of expectation. You're going to feel the pressure. And for them now, it's not a derailer for the season at all. And I think Howe said it himself in the interview, like the season is not over at all. They could still get top 4. They could still get and will likely get European football. So they're still on the right path. They're still on the right trajectory. And it will hurt in the short term, but I don't think the long term will be affected by this loss. And if anything, it will make them hungrier for another final.
Reese, what do you think?
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that. I think I said this sort of yesterday. I think this is no criticism of Newcastle or anything. It's a natural way to behave this way. But like, you think it was their first cup final win since the late 90s, and their first chance of a trophy. Trophy in general since 1969. So that's 54 years. You look at that, yeah, all the Geordies coming down and all that. It become more of a day, not so much about the match itself. And I think that's where you saw a clear divide between two teams. One team that knew they were going to win it, one team that had hope they were going to win it. I think Newcastle come into that hope section. It's not a criticism. You get it a lot with a lot of clubs that haven't made many cup finals. Yeah, you do. When Tottenham made the Champions League final a couple of years ago, it become more about the day than the actual game itself. Liverpool, they looked at that, we're going to win this. And I think that really impacted them, and I think that meant they were going to lose. But it's not a bad thing that they actually did lose. Jordan's right, because I think, yes, we're expecting them to progress. We're expecting them to go on to do better things. And I think maybe winning that cup yesterday would have probably been more of a detriment, because I think their performances leading up to it, they were more focused on the cup final, and I think maybe they would have took their foot off the pedal a little bit, because they think, oh, that's it. We've got what we wanted. But I think, they can look at this and go, you know what, the first step, we didn't win it, but now we're hungry to win it. If they would have won it, imagine the expectations. You've got to win it again next year. We want more next year. It's how fans become. You get that taste of it, taste of the sugar. You want more. And I think it would have just repelled and maybe got something a little bit out of hand that I think they didn't want at this stage. So they shouldn't be disheartened. Yes, they weren't great, 2 shots on target, but they'll go into another cup final. I wouldn't be surprised next year and be ready for it. But it did make me think, though, about this as a whole. You say about Eddie Howe, it's not over. Do either of you think that Eddie Howe will be the coach that will deliver their first trophy? Their first, in X amount of years?
That's a difficult one, to be honest. But there's nothing at the. I think he will be given time. So one thing I was going to say was the reaction of when they were getting their sort of second place medals was the way the owners, I don't know the names, to be perfectly honest. It was the woman and the guy. Both the way they reacted and were talking to the players showed that they were sympathetic, and they were like, well done for getting here. So I think they get the bigger picture. So that's where if Newcastle are going to win a trophy in the next 3-4 years, I do see it being Eddie Howe, unless something dramatic happens, like he goes and he loses 10 games in a row at the start of the season. That's the only real thing that I see happening. It's going to be Eddie Howe, most likely.
Yeah, I do think, it's hard at the minute to make a case as to why he wouldn't be, other than the lack of sort of previous trophies. But to play devil's advocate on the loss, Newcastle's form has dipped off a little bit, and I do mean a little bit. I'm not being over dramatic, but their form in the league has dropped off a little bit. They have slipped a place down the table. Spurs, despite not being amazing this season, are now looking, may arguably, bet more likely to finish in the top four. You could argue, and maybe Newcastle fans were getting a little bit carried away. Don't shoot me down on that, but the hype and the excitement around the club,
not all of them, but they were getting it. Some were
yeah,
getting it themselves. So I think that's completely fair to say.
Yeah, they've got the takeover. They've made a few signings. Suddenly, everything's going, almost too good to be true. Then you're in a cup final. I do think there is an argument to say that them losing the cup final gives them a little sort of slap around the face of maybe a bit of reality, maybe putting them back in their place a little bit, just to say, look, don't, chill. You're in a final. You're not the finished article yet. And maybe you could make a case that final will wake them up a little bit to reality and realize that yes, they're on the right path, but success isn't going to happen overnight. It will take time. And I think actually the argument is that losing long term here might actually be better for them and their mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with the game as well, though, the sort of 2 points I think that I don't think we've actually mentioned yet was one was Pope. Pope wasn't playing, and that's their main goalie. They couldn't even use the second goalie because he was actually getting a first place medal for being on the losing team. Dubravka, because United won, obviously. I think that is a big blow, and I think that could have made them sort of. Then it's not. There won't be as good of a team without Pope, and I don't think Karius didn't do too badly, to be honest. But with the second goal, maybe Pope saves that. I think what would be disappointing from Newcastle's perspective was the first goal, though, because look at that back line. You've forget Trippier, but the other three, they're all 6'7", something like that, something stupidly high, and it's fully intentional of having such a big defence that their defensive record has been so good. It was like similar that Chelsea did under Mourinho. That back four, including the goalie, were all 6 foot something, like a tall players, big players, to help with the defensive side. So to concede a header in that position would just be so sort of disappointing, because I'd expect Shaw, Botman, or Byrne to be getting their head on it over Casemiro. Casemiro is a good header of the ball, but still, I'd expect one of them three to win it over him. Apart from that, though, I agree Newcastle didn't play badly, so it wasn't something you could be disappointed about the whole performance. But it's something that they're struggling on is the final third, and I think they had 2 or 3 big opportunities to be putting in. If they put the right ball through, it was a 1-on-1 situation. I think 2 of them fell to Almiron. I think 1 came to St Max. It was just look, if you replay them sort of scenarios and you're like, plays it left instead of right, it's a 1-on-1 situation. That game could have been so much different. But I think that's something Newcastle are progressing with. Sort of the reason why they bought Isaac in January. It's progressing, and I think obviously a few players have dipped from the form they had at the start of the season, like Almiron, who was everything he touched was a goal kind of scenario, but is slightly dipped. I think that's other than that, Newcastle can sort of have their head still high, but I actually think this could be bad for the season for them. because the form is dipping, and Spurs have pipped them. Now, Newcastle win their 2 games in hand, they go above them. But if they don't win the 2, they'll be level points. If they don't lose, if they win 1, draw 1, and their next game for Newcastle is Man City away. So that already starts to. I'm hoping that Newcastle are sort of deflated and crap, to be perfectly honest, just so we win. But it then turns into a game where they need to pick up points to keep top 4 in their hands. And that's where I feel like it could slightly derail the top 4 charge. But if they get Europa League, I think they should still be very happy with that. If you look at it from sort of at the start of the season, if you get to a final and you get Europa, they'd all be very happy.
The interesting thing is on that, maybe that I'd be interested to hear a Newcastle fans' perspective, but I think there again is a case to say, obviously, you're never going to say you want to finish lower in the league. Obviously, you want top 4. Obviously, you want Champions League. But like for a club like Newcastle, who haven't really tasted the European football recently, if you put them in the Champions League, let's be fair, they're just not winning it. Like, I'm sorry, but they're just not going to win the Champions League next season. It's just not going to happen. It is as simple as that, sadly. But you put them in the Europa League and you look at the games and the teams who could be in that, and you say, hold on, like West Ham, you kind of fancy them and you'd actually give them a chance and you wouldn't rule them out going to, a Europa League final. And that's suddenly a lot more possible. So
I slightly disagree with. I agree with they're probably not going to win the Champions League, but you can finish 3rd in your group and get back into Europa. There's you can still go because what Champions League will bring is in the summer they can be like, we're playing Champions League football. We can get this. We can go from this player to this player, and I think that is what could propel them a bit quicker down the line, getting the Champions League level players instead of what Europa League gets you. To be honest, I don't think there's going to be a great amount of difference, but it could just be that slightly level above that could help. So I think Champions League would just be better overall.
Yeah, I think we're jumping the gun a bit with Newcastle because their fans are very realistic at this stage. I think them and the owners, I think they were aiming for 7th. Anywhere better than where they were last season was always going to be a good sign. And the argument should be, has there been signs of progress? That would be their best judgment, and clearly there has. I think, even if they fell out the top 4, I think, they'll be a bit disappointed, but I think they'll get over it pretty quickly because they know what they've achieved. It will become an issue if it happens again next season. You know what I mean?
I think Leicester, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
You had the top 4 in your hands effectively, and then they've let it slip.
Yeah, I mean, they'll be slightly disappointed to miss out on Europe when you think about it, because I think as Wenger famously said, didn't he? Once you've had caviar, it's very hard to go back to sausages. And I do think that that would be the case, but I don't think it'd be too bad if they finish 5th, 6th. That's beyond expectations. And you're right, they're not really going to have trouble attracting players because it's quite clear what their vision is, going for young, hungry players. They're not going for the Mbappes or they're not going for the Neymars. That might come in time, but they're not. And they're going for things that are going to fit their philosophy. And I think that's what they're going to do. And I think that's how they're going to keep it. And I think that's going to help them edge over. So I don't think they'll be too disappointed, but I think, like I said, it will hurt a tiny bit, but they'll rebuild and come back. It's up to how Eddie Howe works next season. I think is the big thing for him, and I'd hate to put pressure on him at this stage after his job, but yeah, it's how does he end up just the bridesmaid? I'm sure they'd like to see him be the bride.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, I think there was a point that you made yesterday, Reece, in our chat, was the favourites normally win the final. Now, there's been a few exceptions. I've sadly been to one and been on the end of it, with Wigan beating us. Arsenal had it when Birmingham won the League Cup. Do Newcastle need to just get into a final against someone where they're favourites in order to win it? Because City had that with their first trophy in so many years with the FA Cup. We played Stoke in the final. It's something that can get you just over the line and then do it. And we've seen teams in the finals, like Watford got to the FA Cup final, Villa in the League Cup final. This is against City, so I know the teams. But if they get one of them, they'll be favourites. Is that what they need just to get over the line? Because I think, like we're saying with United, getting that first trophy is just important, and that can push you on. Is that what they kind of need? The bit of luck of the draw kind of scenario, and then they'll push on, or can they do it against one of what's known as the top six?
Yeah, I mean, they're more than capable of doing it against one of the top six, you know. But I think the big issue with them is, it's who in the top six it would be. Because I think if they were going up, say, Spurs in the final, Spurs are going to be just as hungry as Newcastle. Let's be blunt. That could be a 50-50 game. I do agree. Like I said, I've always said modern football is where, David does not beat Goliath. So I do think that Newcastle's going to have to be in the Goliath situation and enjoy a favourable draw. That's not a criticism. As far as I'm concerned, you can only play who you draw. It doesn't matter if you draw Real Madrid or Cheltenham Town. That's who you've got. And it's up to you to make sure that you do not lose that draw. You can all laugh at them when they go out, but it's impressive to say, well, we went through. That's it. It's all you got handed to you. So I think it will help them. I think that's a lot of things. Like I said, for Man City, it's very helpful. I'm not sure who Ferguson played in his FA Cup final trophy that, pretty much got him the ball rolling there. I'm not sure it was who he played there, but I'm sure Man United were the favourites there. You need to get that favourable draw gives them the confidence, and then it goes from being, we're here just hoping to win, like against United, to be, we're here to win. You'll see that mentality change without realising it. It won't become about the event; it will become about winning, taking that trophy home. So, I think that will benefit them.
Yeah, I do think they need that to some degree. Like they're clearly capable on their day of beating a big side, as they have done. But I do think yesterday, the thing is, as we said, United are in ridiculous form. But sometimes it does just take an easy run. And Jamie, you said it earlier, we didn't really expand on it, but you're right. This United run to get to the final is insane. No disrespect to the teams they've beat, but you'd back any big club to beat those teams in a cup run and win it. So I think you could to play devil's advocate against United. You could say actually this is one of the easiest cup runs. Albeit it's not beating Burton in the semi-final. I think everyone will always remember that because that was just absolutely crazy. But it is still a very easy run. But as we said, in a year's time, United aren't going to care about the run. They're just going to care about the trophy, and it gives you confidence. And I think the same if Newcastle can get back to a final soon. Ideally, yes, it's just against a lower team because I think if it is, you'd back them every day of the week.
So just on that point, sorry, just to jump in with what Reece said, Ferguson's first FA Cup final was against Crystal Palace, so they would have been favourites for that. It does show it. It's something that does happen.
It helps, 100%. It helps, and it just lessens that mentality a little bit of where it's like you've really got to. The thing is, at the end of the day, it's still a one-off game, but if you go into a final as favourites against a weaker team, then it's fairly obvious that you're going to have a better chance of winning, and it does take a lot of that pressure off, in my opinion. And I guess, well, from my side, I guess before we wrap up, let's have some sort of realistic estimates. How long do we each think it will take Newcastle to actually win a trophy, and what trophy would it be? Because there's only 4 available each season. We've got to remember this. We're saying trophy, but the standard of the top, we talk about the top 4, then we talk about the top 6. Newcastle are now entering that. You've got Fulham, you've got Brighton, you've got Chelsea, Liverpool having a bad season. It's actually going to be even tougher each year now to win these trophies. So how long do we think it will take them to win, and what will it be? Jamie, I'll start with
you. It's going to be a League Cup or an FA Cup. It's one of the two. I don't like. Europa League is something that I don't. Yeah, just stick with the sort of simpler one. But it is difficult because, like you say, Chelsea have been very poor this season. Liverpool been off it as well. Arsenal were more focused on the league, and then City just had an absolute shocker at Southampton after beating two of the teams before, two of the other big teams. So maybe not next year, but I'd be surprised if it gets to sort of 4 more seasons and they've not won one. So I'll give that sort of time frame. But if they don't, that I don't see Eddie Howe being in charge if that's the case.
I don't think it'll take as long as, well, if it takes as long as 4, I would probably argue there's something very, very wrong with their recruitment policy and things of that nature. But again, steady progress. I'd hate to go around the houses here, but my argument is now that they've had the taste of the final, if they get a nice favourable cup run, FA Cup or League Cup, against a smaller club, then yes, and I think Eddie Howe will be there to deliver it. Realistically, I think Eddie Howe is not going to deliver it. I think they're going to need a manager to get him over that line, not a coach. And I think it will be an FA Cup they'll get. I think within 3 years, no more than that. Because I think the League Cup semi-final 2 legs can be such a tough one to do, especially if you're against a City or United. So I would like to see Eddie Howe do it, but I think they'll bring in somebody else who will just edge him over that line. I think that's going to be the difference. And I'd hate to say that for Eddie Howe, but unless he gets a favourable cup run next year.
Yeah, I'll go a bit more specific, and I reckon in 2 years, I think they'll win the Carabao Cup, or it might have a new name by then. Who knows? The reason I just think now, because they've had a taste of the Carabao Cup, I do think they'll now view this as like their trophy almost. Although that sounds weird because they've not won it, but I think now you've got to bear in mind with the Carabao, it's earlier in the season. Typically, the big teams will all rest in the competition, so it's an easier target for a club like Newcastle. And now they've had a taste. I can see them putting a lot of time and attention into the Carabao. And what they should do every season is just go full strength and go, right, we back ourselves against a big team. We'd back ourselves even more so against a big team with a weakened squad. Let's make it our trophy and get the first one done. We might have to say
it's a trophy they've not won before. They've not won the League Cup.
Yeah, it's hard to say it's their trophy. Obviously, I don't mean that, but it just feels like the easiest to win, and
it helps set the standard, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
that benchmark. You've got one. Now let's go for the others. It gives you that formula, I think, to get there.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. As always, Man United fans, do you agree with us? Is this the start of another revolution? Newcastle fans, are we fair? Are we unfair on how? Will it be 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. But as always, like, comment, and subscribe. You know the drill.